Lucas stood in the dimly lit corridor, his hand resting on the hilt of his blaster. His mind wasn't entirely focused on the mission ahead. It had been a long time since anything truly excited him. The streets outside were filled with the sounds of distant explosions and chaotic shouting, another typical day on this war-torn planet. He had been assigned to guard many people before, but this was different. This wasn't just some random assignment. This was her, Princess Aria, the one person in the galaxy who could change the course of history. He looked down at the comm device in his hand. Her voice crackled through, authoritative, demanding. "Lucas, report. Are you ready?" Lucas sighed. She was always like this, commanding, expecting people to follow her every word without question. There was no room for doubt in her voice, no sign of fear. It was as if she believed she was invincible, or maybe she just didn't care. "Yes, Princess," Lucas replied, his voice flat. "I'm ready." But the truth was he wasn't. Lucas hadn't asked for this assignment. He hadn't wanted to be the bodyguard to a princess, especially not one who thought she could handle everything herself. After all, she was a leader, wasn't she? But in Lucas's experience, leadership often came with a side of arrogance. He wasn't looking forward to babysitting someone who had probably never fought a day in her life. The door to the chamber opened, and there she was, Princess Aria. She stood tall, her posture regal and proud, wearing the military uniform of her people. Her short silver hair framed her face, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to look straight through him. She didn't smile, not even as their eyes met. There was something unsettling about her. She wasn't like the others he'd protected in the past. Weak, frail, afraid. She exuded an energy that made him feel like an outsider in his own world. "Are we going, or do you need more time?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp, like the edge of a blade. Lucas hesitated, his hand instinctively tightening around the blaster. "I'm good," he replied, stepping aside to let her pass. As they moved through the hallways of the compound, the air felt tense. Aria walked ahead, her head held high, as if the weight of the world didn't even faze her. Lucas couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have her confidence, to walk into a dangerous world without any second thoughts. But that wasn't him. He had seen too much of the galaxy's darkness to trust in anything that wasn't earned. He had learned the hard way that confidence wasn't always a sign of strength. It could just be a mask hiding insecurity and fear. "You know, I don't need a guard," Aria said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't mocking, but there was an underlying challenge in it. "I can handle myself. I don't need anyone to protect me." Lucas glanced at her but said nothing. He had heard this before from other people, leaders, generals, and soldiers who thought they were untouchable. It never ended well. "I'm here to make sure you get to safety," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Whether you need me or not, I'll do my job." Aria didn't respond immediately. Instead, she continued walking, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if she was already mentally preparing for the chaos that was sure to come. Lucas couldn't tell if she was truly focused or just pretending to be. Either way, he knew one thing. This mission wasn't going to be easy. The compound's walls were thick, reinforced against enemy fire, but they couldn't hold forever. The planet had been under siege for months now, and it wasn't just enemy forces they had to worry about. There were spies in the ranks, traitors who would do anything to get their hands on the princess. And Lucas? He was stuck between his duty and his growing unease about the whole situation. They reached the outer gates of the compound where a sleek transport ship waited. Aria paused for a moment, looking out at the dusty, scarred landscape. Her eyes softened for just a second, but it was gone before Lucas could fully see it. "Ready?" Lucas asked, his hand resting on the ship's hatch. Aria turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Let's go." The ride to their destination was long, silent, save for the hum of the ship's engines. Lucas sat in his seat, keeping his eyes on the horizon. There was something unsettling about traveling through this war zone, especially with someone like Aria by his side. She wasn't just any princess. She was a symbol. To her people, she was their hope, their future. To the enemy, she was a target. The planet's skyline was a crumbling mess. Skyscrapers that once stood tall now reduced to rubble. Lucas had seen it all before. Cities that had fallen, leaders who had crumbled under pressure. There was no safety in this galaxy. And as much as Arya wanted to pretend otherwise, she wasn't immune. The ship suddenly jolted as it hit turbulence, forcing Lucas to brace himself. A moment later, the comms crackled again. "Enemy ships on our tail," Arya said calmly. "We need to move faster." Lucas cursed under his breath. This was it, the moment he had been dreading. He gripped his blaster tightly, ready for whatever came next. The princess's orders came quick and precise, but Lucas wasn't sure if she truly understood the danger they were in. This wasn't a mere transport mission. They were being hunted. As enemy fire hit the ship's hull, Lucas shot a look at Arya. She didn't flinch, didn't show fear. Her eyes were locked on the enemy vessels, calculating her next move. For a brief moment, Lucas saw a side of her that he hadn't expected. A leader who wasn't afraid to fight, who wasn't just hiding behind orders. It made him reconsider his initial impression of her, but it didn't make him trust her yet. The ship lurched again, throwing him off balance, and he stumbled, catching himself just in time. Arya, however, remained perfectly still, unfazed by the chaos around them. Lucas couldn't help but wonder what would happen when things got truly dangerous. Would she still be as confident? As the ship continued to speed toward their destination, Lucas knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was something bigger, something he might not fully understand yet, but he was about to find out. The countdown had begun. Lucas could feel the tension in the air as the transport ship skimmed over the ruined landscape. The familiar hum of the ship's engines did little to calm his nerves. His mind kept racing, constantly shifting from one possible danger to the next. The princess was sitting across from him, her expression unreadable. She didn't seem bothered by the shaking of the ship, but Lucas was well aware that they weren't exactly safe. "Are we close?" Arya's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and demanding, as usual. Lucas could feel the weight of her gaze, but he didn't let it show. "Not yet," he replied, his eyes fixed on the display in front of him. "We'll be there in about 10 minutes. "Good," Arya said, almost to herself. "I can't afford to waste any more time." Lucas didn't respond. He had learned not to argue with her when she was like this. She was focused, but in a way that bordered on reckless. He respected her determination, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she was young, much too young to be carrying the burden of an entire planet's future on her shoulders. Suddenly, the ship lurched, throwing Lucas off balance. He gripped the armrest just in time, his heart racing. This wasn't turbulence, it was a direct hit. The lights flickered, and a warning siren blared. Arya shot up from her seat, her face hardening. "Enemies," she said, her voice calm, but Lucas could hear the underlying tension. She moved quickly to the controls, her fingers flying over the panel. "They've found us." Lucas stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. He didn't need to look out the window to know what was coming. The ship's hull had taken a hit, and they were likely surrounded by enemy forces. Their position had been compromised. They had been flying too low, too slow, an easy target. "Stay calm," he told Arya, his tone much more serious now. "I'll handle the defense. You just make sure we don't crash." Arya looked at him, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "I'm not some helpless princess," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "I can fight too." Lucas hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Fine, but I'm the one who's trained for this." Without another word, Arya moved to the side, giving Lucas space to work. She wasn't asking for his protection anymore. She was already starting to fight her own battles, and Lucas wasn't sure how he felt about that. On one hand, it was impressive. On the other, he had never been comfortable with the idea of her facing danger without backup. The ship jolted again, and this time Lucas could hear the sound of blaster fire hitting their shields. He cursed under his breath and took a deep breath. It was time to act. He opened the hatch to the side of the ship, stepping out onto the small ledge. His boots made a quiet thud against the metal, and he quickly ducked behind the ship's hull to avoid the incoming fire. He had a clear view of the enemy ships now, 3 sleek fighters closing in fast. They were heavily armed and skilled, and Lucas knew that if they didn't act fast, they would be dead in the water. Arya's voice came over the comms. "Lucas, what's the plan?" "I'm going to take out their engines," Lucas said, his voice steady. "It'll slow them down long enough for us to escape." There was a brief silence before Arya responded. "Be careful." Lucas didn't have time for more words. He focused, his mind fully in the moment. The first enemy ship was in range. He raised his blaster and aimed carefully at the engines, knowing he had only one shot before they noticed. Him. He fired. The blast hit its mark. The enemy ship shuddered, then spiraled downward, crashing into the desert below. 1 down, 2 to go. Before he could take aim at the next ship, a sharp pain ran through his leg. He looked down to see a burn mark on his thigh from a grazing shot. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let the pain slow him down. His mission was clear. Lucas quickly moved, repositioning himself to a more secure location. He aimed at the second ship and fired again. This time he was a little more careless, rushing the shot. The blast missed, and the ship banked hard, firing back at him with deadly accuracy. Another round of blaster fire rang out from the ship, striking the ledge near Lucas's feet. He ducked, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, and rolled behind the engine's exhaust pipe for cover. His heart was racing, but his focus remained. "Need some help?" Arya's voice came through his earpiece again, steady and calm as ever. He clenched his jaw. "I'm fine. Just keep the ship steady." From his vantage point, Lucas could see the final ship closing in. He was running out of time, and the damage from the first 2 ships had left him with little room for error. He steadied his breath, aimed once more at the final ship's engine, and fired. The shot landed squarely on target, causing the last enemy ship to spiral and crash into the sands below. Lucas allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before the pain in his leg hit him again, reminding him that the job wasn't over yet. He quickly retreated back into the ship, making his way through the hatch as the sounds of enemy fire faded into the distance. Arya was already at the controls, her fingers moving with precision. The ship was intact, but the damage to their systems was significant. She had done her part, staying focused, guiding the ship, making sure they didn't fall from the sky. "You did well," Lucas said, stepping toward her, still wincing from the pain in his leg. Arya glanced over at him, her face unreadable. "You did well too," she replied. But there was something in her eyes now, something different. A newfound respect, maybe. Or maybe it was just the realization that Lucas was more than just a bodyguard. He wasn't just some soldier sent to do a job. He was someone who had put his life on the line to protect her, to make sure she survived. And that meant something, even if neither of them said it aloud. Lucas leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with every breath. As the ship continued its flight toward their destination, the worst was over. For now. But Lucas knew this was just the beginning. The mission was far from finished, and Arya's true test was yet to come. They both had a long way to go, and Lucas couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the real danger arrived. The days that followed were tense. The sky above them remained a dark, almost oppressive gray, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Lucas and Arya were now deep in enemy territory, traveling through a barren landscape filled with abandoned cities and shattered remnants of once proud civilizations. Their mission had shifted from escaping immediate danger to staying one step ahead of the enemies who were hunting them. Lucas limped slightly, his leg still aching from the injury he had taken during the skirmish with the enemy ships. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to make him move slower than usual. Still, he refused to rest. Every step was a reminder of the dangerous world they were in, and every moment counted. Arya was beside him, as usual, her posture unwavering and her eyes sharp. It was as if nothing could rattle her. She moved with the grace of a leader even as the weight of the galaxy seemed to press down on her. But Lucas could see the occasional flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't as invincible as she seemed. "You're pushing yourself too hard." Lucas said, his voice low as they made their way through a narrow canyon. "We need to take a break." Arya didn't answer immediately. She just kept walking, her boots crunching against the dusty ground. She had the same look of determination on her face, but Lucas could see the exhaustion starting to show through. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady but lacking its usual edge. "We have no time to waste." Lucas watched her for a moment, then sighed. She was right, of course, there was no time for rest. The enemy wasn't going to wait for them to recover. And neither were the people who depended on Arya. As much as he hated to admit it, Lucas understood that. Their journey took them through a desolate stretch of land. The once bustling cities were now nothing more than ruins, the crumbling buildings, standing as silent witnesses to a past long forgotten. The planet had been ravaged by war and its people were scattered, living in fear of both their enemies and their own leaders. For a moment, as they passed an old market square, Lucas thought he saw something move in the shadows. He instinctively reached for his blaster, but Arya was already ahead of him, scanning the area. She had a sixth sense for danger. She had to. It was part of her training, part of the reason why she was so hard to predict. "We're not alone," Arya said softly, her eyes narrowing. Lucas didn't need to ask how she knew. He had learned over the years to trust her instincts. The two of them had become a team, and in many ways Lucas had started to rely on her more than he cared to admit. They took cover behind a collapsed wall, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Lucas signaled for Arya to stay low as they both crouched behind the rubble. Their attackers were close, but Lucas couldn't see them yet. "Get ready," he whispered, his hand resting on his blaster. Arya nodded, her expression focused. For a moment, Lucas saw a flicker of the princess she used to be, the one who hadn't yet seen the harshness of the world. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the hardened resolve of the leader she had become. The footsteps grew louder. They were close now. Lucas and Arya exchanged a glance, and without a word they moved into position. Lucas peeked around the corner, his eyes scanning for movement. There, 3 men in black armor, armed and dangerous. 3 of them. Lucas muttered under his breath. "You ready?" Arya gave a small nod. She didn't need to say anything. Lucas knew she was ready. The first soldier appeared and Lucas fired. The shot hit the man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other 2 immediately turned, but it was too late. Arya was already moving, her blade flashing in the dim light as she took down one of them with a swift strike. To the chest. Lucas didn't hesitate. He fired again, this time hitting the second soldier square in the chest. The man fell with a loud thud. "Clear," Lucas said, his voice calm but his heart racing. Arya stood over the fallen bodies, her eyes scanning for any more enemies. She wiped her blade clean and returned it to its sheath without a word. It was a clean kill, quick and efficient. But Lucas knew it took something from her every time she had to fight like that. The weight of the world was on her shoulders, and each death, each battle, only added to the burden she was already carrying. "Let's keep moving," Arya said, her voice softer now but still firm. Lucas didn't argue. He knew there was no time to dwell on the fight. They had to stay ahead of the enemy. Stay alive. They continued through the canyon, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows across the land. The air was growing colder, and Lucas could feel the weariness settling into his bones. As they reached a small outpost, a hidden safe house on the edge of a ruined city, Lucas couldn't help but glance at Arya again. She was leading them, but there was something different about her. She wasn't just the princess anymore. She was a survivor, a warrior in her own right, but there was also a deep sadness in her eyes. Lucas had seen it before, and he couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep it all together. How much longer she could keep fighting without cracking under the pressure. They entered the safe house, a small fortified building built into the side of a mountain. The door creaked as they stepped inside, and Lucas immediately went to work, checking their supplies and making sure they were secure. Arya, however, stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon outside the window. She was lost in thought, her mind far away. Lucas watched her, wondering what she was thinking. What was going on inside her head? "You don't have to carry all this alone," he said, breaking the silence. Arya turned to face him, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she just nodded and walked to the back of the room, where a small cot was set up. Lucas watched her for a moment longer before turning back to the window. The night had settled in, and the stars above were the only thing that seemed to offer any kind of peace. But Lucas knew that peace was temporary. It always was. Tomorrow they would leave again and the journey would continue. But for now, at least, they were safe. At least, for the moment. The safe house had become their temporary refuge, though Lucas knew it wouldn't be long before they had to move again. Every day, they grew closer to their unknown enemies, and every night, the tension between him and Arya grew. It was subtle. At first, a lingering glance here, a shared silence there, but it was becoming harder to ignore. They had both been through a lot in the last few days, and now, more than ever, they were learning to rely on each other. That morning, Lucas awoke to the sound of distant explosions. The peace they'd enjoyed in the past few hours was already shattering. He quickly checked the perimeter, confirming that the safe house was still intact. Then he found Arya sitting at the small table in the corner, her back to him, her hands resting on an old map. "What's going on?" Lucas asked, stepping into the room. Arya didn't turn around immediately. Her fingers traced the edges of the map, as if lost in thought. "It's getting worse. The enemy has started to target civilian populations. The rebellion's leaders are dead and I'm the only one left." Lucas frowned. "That's not true. You're not the only one left." He stepped closer, looking at the map with her. It showed several marked locations, each one crossed out with red ink. "These cities," he said. "They're all marked." "Why?" Arya finally turned to face him, her expression hard but tired. "These are the places where the rebellion had strongholds. I thought they were safe, but now they've all been compromised. We're running out of options. If I don't act fast, this war will end with my death, and with it the last chance for freedom." Lucas didn't know what to say. He had known Arya's position in the war, but hearing it so plainly, the weight of it, made it more real. She wasn't just a leader. She was the last hope for an entire planet. But what did that really mean for her? "You're not going to let that happen," Lucas said, his voice firm. "I won't let it happen." Arya looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something more personal. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Lucas," she whispered. The words caught him off guard. He had grown accustomed to Arya's strength, her unyielding will. But now, in this moment of vulnerability, he saw a side of her he had never seen before. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was someone who had been fighting for her life and the lives of others for far too long. She took a deep breath and stood up. "I can't do this alone. We need to stop them before they can take everything from us." Lucas nodded. "I'll follow you no matter what." But as they began to plan their next move, something strange happened. The door to the safe house rattled. Lucas quickly motioned for Arya to hide. He grabbed his blaster, his pulse quickening, as he silently moved toward the door. It opened slowly, the creak of the hinges louder than it should have been. Lucas's eyes narrowed as he saw a figure step inside. It was a woman dressed in black armor, her face hidden by a mask. She carried herself with the calm assurance of someone who was used to being in control. "Who are you?" Lucas demanded, his blaster aimed at the woman. The masked woman didn't flinch. "I am not your enemy," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "But I'm the one who holds the key to your survival." Lucas hesitated, confused by the woman's words. He lowered his blaster slightly but didn't put it down. "What do you want?" The woman stepped further into the room, her boots making a soft thud against the floor. "I know who you're running from, Arya, and I know what they want from you." Arya had emerged from her hiding spot now, standing behind Lucas with her hands on her hips. "And who are you to know what they want?" she asked, her voice cool but wary. The woman removed her helmet, revealing long, dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. My name is Sarah. I was part of the rebellion until they destroyed it from the inside. Now, I work alone, and I know things about your enemies that could change everything. Lucas shot a glance at Arya, who was studying Sarah closely. How do we know you're telling the truth? Lucas asked. He wasn't about to trust just anyone, especially someone who seemed to know far too much. Sarah smiled, but it was a cold smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Because I have something they don't want you to have. A secret weapon. A weapon that could end this war. Arya's eyes widened. What do you mean? What weapon? Sarah stepped closer to them, her gaze never leaving Arya's. I can't tell you everything right now, but you need to trust me. They'll come for you, Arya, and when they do, you need to be ready. Lucas was still skeptical. How do you know so much about our enemies? Sarah paused, her expression hardening. Because I was once part of their ranks. I know how they think, how they plan, and I know they want you dead. You're the last piece they need to finish their control over the planet. If they succeed in eliminating you, there's no one left to fight back. Lucas turned to Arya, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, but she seemed deep in thought. The weight of Sarah's words seemed to be sinking in. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was the target. The final piece in a game of power that had already cost so many lives. We can't waste any more time, Arya said finally, her voice firm. Tell us what we need to do. Sarah nodded. There's a place deep in the mountains, an old research facility. That's where you'll find the key to your survival. But you have to be careful. It's guarded by more than just soldiers. The enemies have something else waiting for you there, something even more dangerous. Lucas stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. How do we get in? Sarah looked at him, then at Arya. You'll need to trust me. There's no other choice now. The room was silent for a moment, as the three of them stood there, the weight of the situation settling in. They had no other options. The path forward was unclear, and it was dangerous, but there was no turning back. Arya spoke first, her voice steady. Let's go. The journey to the old research facility was grueling. The mountains loomed high above them, their jagged peaks hidden in a veil of mist. The air grew thinner the higher they climbed, and Lucas could feel the strain on his muscles as they moved, deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Each step was a reminder of just how far they had come, and just how much further they still had to go. Arya, despite the hardships, seemed as determined as ever. She walked ahead, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, always alert. But Lucas could see the weariness in her movements, the way she stumbled slightly after every few steps. Her body was beginning to show the toll the journey had taken on. We should rest for a moment, Lucas said, his voice low. He didn't want to stop. The sooner they reached their destination, the sooner they could find a way to end this nightmare. But he couldn't ignore the fact that Arya was pushing herself too hard. I'm fine, Arya replied, though her voice lacked its usual strength. She didn't slow down, but Lucas could tell she was lying. You're not, Lucas said, catching up to her. You need to rest. She stopped walking, turning to face him. For a moment there was something in her eyes, something vulnerable, something that made Lucas's heart ache. He had never seen her like this, so close to breaking. The leader, the warrior, the princess, all of them seemed to fade away, leaving behind a woman who was struggling just to survive. I don't have time to rest, Lucas, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm the last hope for my people. If I stop now, if I fall, everything falls with me. Lucas stepped closer, his expression softening. You don't have to carry the weight alone. I'll be here, every step of the way. Arya didn't respond, but she didn't turn away either. They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Arya sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. Maybe you're right. A short break won't hurt. They found a small outcropping of rock, just enough to shield them from the wind. Lucas sat down, keeping an eye on their surroundings while Arya rested against the stone. She closed her eyes, trying to find some semblance of peace in the midst of all the chaos. But Lucas knew it wouldn't last long. They had already stayed too long in one place. After a few minutes, Arya stood up again, pushing herself to her feet. "Let's go." Lucas nodded, but before they could take another step, a sharp, echoing sound rang through the air. Gunfire. Lucas's instincts kicked in immediately. He pushed Arya down behind the rocks, taking cover himself as the world around them exploded into chaos. "Stay down," Lucas shouted, his hand reaching for his blaster. He could see the enemy soldiers in the distance, moving toward them with purpose. They were closing in fast. "How many are there?" Arya asked, her voice steady despite the danger. Lucas peeked over the rock, quickly scanning the area. "At least 6, maybe more. They're coming from the north." Arya's expression hardened. "We don't have the luxury of running. We need to fight." Lucas looked at her, torn. The last thing he wanted was to get into another fight, but they didn't have a choice. The enemy was too close, and they couldn't afford to lose ground. "Get ready," he said, gripping his blaster. "Hider, we're going to need to fight our way out." Arya nodded, unsheathing a short blade from her side. She was ready. Lucas could see it in her eyes, the fire that had always been there, the same fire that had made her a leader. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a soldier, and Lucas had to admit that he had underestimated her. The enemy soldiers finally appeared, charging through the rocky terrain. Lucas took the first shot, hitting one of the soldiers in the chest. The man crumpled to the ground, but the others didn't hesitate. They returned fire, forcing Lucas and Arya to stay low. "Take cover," Lucas shouted, as a barrage of blaster fire rained down on them. Arya darted from behind the rock, using the cover of the terrain to close the distance between them and the enemy. Lucas followed, his blaster aimed and ready. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins as the battle unfolded around him. They were outnumbered, but Lucas wasn't about to give up. He had faced worse odds before. He could handle this, but it wasn't just about him anymore. He couldn't lose. Arya. Not after everything they had been through together. Arya struck first, taking down another soldier with a swift, precise move. Her blade flashed in the air, cutting through the enemy ranks. Lucas was right behind her, picking off soldiers one by one with his blaster. They worked as a team, covering each other's backs, moving in perfect sync. But Lucas knew they couldn't keep this up forever. There were too many of them. "Lucas, watch out," Arya yelled, just as one of the soldiers aimed directly at him. He barely had time to react before a shot rang out, and the soldier collapsed. Arya had fired the shot. Lucas turned to her, surprise written on his face. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse. Arya's gaze didn't meet his. Instead, she just continued to move forward, her focus unbroken. "You would have done the same for me." Lucas didn't say anything. He just followed her lead, taking out the last 2 soldiers with quick, calculated shots. When the fighting finally stopped, they were left standing amidst the carnage, breathing heavily. "Is it over?" Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Lucas replied, scanning the area one last time. "But we can't stay here. We have to keep moving." Arya nodded, though she seemed to be struggling to stay upright. Lucas stepped closer to her, offering her his shoulder. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted his support. "We've been through worse," Arya said, her tone surprisingly light despite the situation. Lucas smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, but I'm starting to think we're running out of worse." They moved forward, each step carrying the weight of the battle they had just fought. Lucas could feel it. Arya was starting to wear down, and it was starting to show. But he wouldn't let her fall. Not now. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was fighting beside her, and that made all the difference. The mountains were silent now, the echo of gunfire replaced by the haunting quiet of the wasteland. Lucas and Arya stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the sprawling facility below them. It was hidden deep in the valley, surrounded by high, jagged peaks that seemed to touch the sky. The old research facility, abandoned long ago, now served as the last hope for both of them. If what Sarah had said was true, this was the key to everything. Lucas adjusted his grip on his blaster, feeling the weight of the weapon in his hand. It was a familiar weight, one that had saved his life countless times. But today, it felt different. Today, the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about stopping an enemy that had taken everything from them. Arya was the only thing standing between them and total destruction. He had made a promise to protect her, and no matter the cost, he would keep that promise. How far? Arya asked, her voice calm but tired. She was standing a little closer to him now, her steps slower as though the journey had taken its toll. She wasn't the same strong, commanding leader she had been when they first met. She was still strong, but the burden of leadership had worn her down. "It's not far," Lucas replied, glancing at the map. "We'll reach it by nightfall if we keep moving." Arya nodded. She hadn't said much since the battle in the mountains, but Lucas could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't just physical. The weight of her people's future was starting to show. She had been carrying it alone for too long, and Lucas knew that if they didn't find a way to end this soon, it might break her. As they descended into the valley, the air grew colder. The wind cut through their clothes, biting at their skin, but neither of them slowed down. They were so close now. The research facility was within their grasp, and Lucas knew that once they entered those walls, there would be no turning back. The facility was old, the structure crumbling in places, but there was something about it that felt alive. Maybe it was the quiet hum of the generators still running, or the faint glow coming from the cracked windows. It was as though it had been waiting for them, for this moment. Lucas took a deep breath as they reached the entrance, the heavy metal doors creaking as he pushed them open. Inside, the air smelled stale, the scent of forgotten years lingering in the darkness. The flickering lights cast long shadows across the hallways, making it feel like they were walking through a ghost ship. "Stay close," Lucas whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know what's inside." Arya's footsteps echoed behind him as they moved deeper into the facility. The silence was almost suffocating, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He was used to the feeling of danger lurking around every corner, but this was different. It was as though the very walls of the facility were holding their breath. They made their way down a narrow corridor, and Lucas's heart skipped a beat when he saw the doors at the end of the hall. They were large, reinforced, and the symbol of Arya's people was etched into the metal. This was it, the heart of the facility. Lucas stepped forward, his hand reaching for the door, but just as his fingers brushed the cold metal, the lights flickered one last time, and the entire building shook. A low rumble echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of distant footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps. "They found us," Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to move." Arya's eyes hardened. She wasn't afraid. In fact, the determination in her gaze was sharper than it had been in days. "No. This ends now." They pushed open the doors, stepping into a large, dimly lit room. The facility's control center was laid out before them, filled with consoles, monitors, and old machinery that had long since stopped working. But there, in the center of it all, was the key to everything. A large holographic projection flickered to life as they approached. The image of a man, stern and calculating, appeared before them. His face was familiar to Arya. She had seen him in the briefing rooms, heard his name whispered in the halls of power. This was the man behind the conspiracy, the one who had pulled the strings to create the war, to tear her world apart. "Arya," the man's voice crackled through the speakers. "I've been waiting for you." Lucas stepped forward, his hand on the blaster, but Arya held him back. She was ready. She had to be. "What do you want?" Arya demanded, her voice unwavering. The man smiled coldly. "What do I want? I want control. I want to see your people fall. I want to see you fall." Arya's face remained stoic, but Lucas could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. This was the moment. This was the man who had caused so much pain, so much destruction. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her people, for everything they had lost. "You won't win," Arya said, her voice calm but firm. "This war ends today." The man's smile faded, and for the first time Lucas saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a puppet. You always have been." Lucas stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "She's not a puppet, she's the future." The man's eyes narrowed, and he reached for the controls in front of him. Lucas could see the warning signs on the screens. This was it. The final moment. Arya didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she activated the terminal in front of her, her fingers flying over the keys. The room hummed with energy, and the man's image flickered. "You've lost," Arya said, her eyes hardening with resolve. "This ends now." With one final push, the control center powered down, and the holographic figure vanished. The war was over. The enemy had been defeated. Lucas stood beside Arya, watching the final traces of the man's power fade away. There was a silence in the air, a sense of finality that hung heavy in the room. Arya had done it. She had taken control of her destiny, of her people's future. But as they stood there, Lucas couldn't help but wonder what came next. They had won the battle, but the war, on a personal level, was far from over. Arya turned to him, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace in her gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Lucas gave her a small, weary smile. "It's not over yet. But for today, we've won." The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had come this far together, and no matter what came next, they would face it side by side.